Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Unraveling Politics, a weekly political analysis show. So, we have one major topic to talk about today, and that is the tax cuts finally passing the House of Representatives and going to President Trump's desk, which was signed into law. If you're tired of hearing about the tax cuts, then you're in luck. This will probably be the last time we ever have to talk about them, unless it comes up in the news cycle again. And we also have some other stuff to talk about at the end. So, thank you for joining me. I hope you had a great 4th of July weekend. Let's get right into it. So I left you guys off last Monday with the Senate not yet passing the bill. The Senate passed numerous amendments. It took a long time. I can't get into them all, but it passed by the narrowest of margins, 51 to 50, with J.D. Vance as the tie-breaking vote. Then it moved on to the House of Representatives. And early in the week, Elon Musk renewed his feud with Donald Trump, posting on Twitter, "Every member of Congress who campaigned on reducing government spending and then immediately voted for the biggest debt increase in history should hang their head in shame, and they will lose the primary next year if that is the last thing I do on earth." End quote. And as for the House debate, they were debating the bill. It was like watching grass grow, really. It happened all day and overnight. Several members were delayed because of summer storms across the country, delaying the flights. Additionally, there were several GOP holdouts at the end of midnight at the end of the day on Tuesday. In the overnight hours, Johnson and his team were able to get the House to procedurally move the bill forward without changes to the Senate bill, 219 to 213. Every House Republican except Brian Fitzpatrick voted for it, and every Democrat, with no exception, was united against it. Hakeem Jeffries, he's the House Minority Leader. He's the Democrats' leader in the House, spoke for over 8 hours, breaking a record on the House floor in protest of the bill. And obviously, I didn't watch really any of the speech, and nobody can watch 8 hours of a speech. But this is a delay tactic, which he's totally allowed to use. Kevin McCarthy used it back when he was Republican leader in 2021 against Biden's Build Back Better plan. The bill passed 218 to 214 with all but one Republican voting for it, and Trump signed the bill into law on Friday. You might be wondering, how does this new law affect you? Well, we can't get into all the changes, but the most important ones, I think, is if you are on Medicaid. The biggest changes will come to you. Americans aged 19 to 64 enrolled through Medicaid will have to work, volunteer, or attend school or job training at least 80 hours a month, which is about 20 hours a week. The mandate also applies to ages 14 and older as well for parents of children aged 14 and older. The eligibility will need to be renewed more frequently, and patients will have to pay for up to $35 per session per certain care. And this probably doesn't surprise you, but this is the idea, is to make it more frustrating so people don't sign up. And the biggest changes will probably come to the states. It'll be on a state-by-state basis because states, they manage Medicaid. And I know in Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro hasn't been able to get the state budget through, which was due a week ago because we didn't know what federal funding looked like until now. Additionally, the food stamp program has been dramatically shrunken down, broadening work requirements for older Americans, parents of children ages 14 and older, as well as veterans. Since this program is partly paid for by the states, the cuts will be different depending on the state. And I know here in Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro said the program could completely collapse without federal dollars. So we'll have to wait and see on that one. These effects could be felt. They're not going to be felt immediately, but they will be felt in the coming years. If you are on Obamacare or Medicaid, you could still feel the cuts, since less funding through patients means rural hospitals may have to close, reduce staff or services. And rural hospitals in America, especially here in Pennsylvania, because there's a lot of old people in rural areas, and although I don't live in rural Pennsylvania, it's definitely those rural hospitals are under strain already. And in fact, 20% of our population in this state is over the age of 65, so that's not good. And to alleviate a little bit, I think this is something Susan Collins fought for and then voted against the bill, $50 billion in funding, which will be provided for rural hospitals. Now, you might be wondering, what about the tax cuts? This was the whole benefit. Well, the tax cuts, this is an extension of existing policy. So this is not new tax cuts, it's not deeper tax cuts. We aren't really going to see the benefits because we're already feeling them. We're basically continuing the status quo. Except for the higher SALT limit, which is being raised from $10,000 to $40,000. I'm not going to explain it again. I've done it 5 times already. that has been raised. And so except for that, you're not really going to feel very much. $150 billion is going to border security spending, 47 of which is to build the border wall. Remember Mexico was going to pay for it. $154 billion to add defense spending, including $25 billion for a new Iron Dome missile defense system that will supposedly be all made in America. There's a bunch of other stuff as well. I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty, but there's some stuff like higher tax credits for children, deducting car interest from taxes, taxing college endowments, a baby nest egg form from the government. Look that up if you're interested. No tax on tips through 2028, cuts to green energy subsidies, etc. As I said last episode, it was an almost 900-page mega bill, so it was a huge bill. As for public opinion, according to a Pew Research poll, I think it came out about 2 weeks ago, 49% of Americans were opposed to the bill, 29% supported it, and 21% were unsure. Since the bill has been so amended, this poll is probably a little out of date. Americans don't really know what's in this bill, at least most of them don't. And but I can't imagine that the numbers are going to change very much. With 3/4 of independents against it, and that's quite remarkable. I think I shared this last week, and that was quite a shock. So this bill is deeply unpopular, and if I were the president's advisors, I would tell him you need to spend the rest of the summer focused on selling this bill to the public now that you can't undo it. Since this was the president's only major piece of legislation, this means his plan to lump everything into one bill and try to ram it through Congress was successful. They could do this again next year. You are allowed to use a process called reconciliation twice a year, so they could do it again next summer, spring, summer, fall, but they're going to have the midterms to think about, so I don't think we're going to see anything crazy next year. But what is an alternative was to try to break it up into various pieces. So, for example, they could have put some of the tax cuts over here, a higher SALT limit over there. They could have put the cuts over here, but then that would have increased the chances of rebellions against certain aspects of the bill, and it probably would have completely collapsed. So, what comes next? Well, Congress was supposed to adjourn this week and return next week. And I don't know if that means because they were there last week, that means that they're going to be here this coming week. But they did. Thankfully, the only thing left they have to do is get government funding passed because our fiscal year ends in September. But I believe the debt ceiling, or actually I know the debt ceiling has been raised, so thankfully we're not going to default on our debt. And the new ceiling, which was raised by $5 trillion, is now at $42 trillion, I think, which to be honest, we were probably going to hit sometime in 2027. Considering we were about $2 trillion in the hole every year prior to this bill, we're going to be going up about 2.3, maybe 2.4. If we go into recession, it's going to be 2.5 or 2.6. And speaking of recession, we should be finding that out later this month, but I don't want to get distracted. So I'm guessing we're going to hit the debt ceiling again in the spring or summer of 2027. At the latest, it'll be around Labor Day, which is unfortunate, but a sign of the times. And that's something that I warned about on this show for months. Lastly, I want to cover, well, not lastly, but a couple more things. Moving on, I want to cover some economic news. We learned on Thursday that the U.S. economy added nearly 150,000 jobs in the month of June, and the month of May was revised up. So the unemployment rate was expected to rise to 4.3%, which was up 0.1%, but it actually fell to 4.1%. This makes me think the Fed will not be cutting rates anytime soon, so there's really no need. And President Trump has pressured Powell to lower rates, which is bad for the market because it adds instability to the market, and an independent judiciary, yes, but an independent monetary policy is so important. And then again, as I've explained, Powell alone doesn't have the power. He's just one vote of 12. And another thing I wanted to look into a little bit, and I haven't talked about this a lot recently, so I'm going to keep it brief, and this is going to end up being a shorter episode than usual, but it's the war in Ukraine. And Trump has been more pro-Russia, or at least Russian-friendly. However, he made some recent comments that I think could sort of show a shift. And Trump recently admitted that he believed that Russia did not want peace without total surrender from Ukraine. And I haven't talked about Ukraine very much because so much other stuff has been happening, but To fill you in, Trump has continued to try to get Putin to negotiate, and meanwhile, Putin keeps pounding Ukraine with more and more air strikes in an attempt to break their resolve. According to CNN, Ukraine intercepted 476 out of the 539 drones in an overnight attack on the night of July 3rd to 4th, which is great, but that still means about 60 drones actually hit Ukraine. And if you think about that, that happens multiple times a month. That's a lot of drones. And the foreign minister's affair of Ukraine said it was an absolutely horrible and sleepless night in Kyiv. It was one of the worst so far. And Trump admitted that he got nowhere with Putin at all. And he called Putin, but there aren't any other details. It's really not well known. So I'm thinking Trump might shift to sending more aid to Ukraine, or if not, he's definitely not going to be. He's definitely not going to be helping. He's definitely not going to continue the way we've been going. But at the same time, we also learned that President Trump had paused sending weapons to Ukraine, which is kind of a problem because they do need those weapons. And I know on this show I've been advocating for over a year now that we should pull out of this conflict completely. But I will have to admit I am not really interested in Russia taking over all of Ukraine. Just saying. And I will also admit that it's worth a try. The current trajectory is not working. This is not going to work, and we need to change. Whenever you join a conflict, either directly or indirectly, you need to have an exit plan. How do you get out? This is every single war that has gone badly, never had an exit plan. When we went into Afghanistan, we had no plan to get out. When we went into Iraq, we had no plan to get out. When we went in the Gulf War in '91, we did have a plan to go out, and that went pretty well. We had a clear plan, and we took bold action. And then if you think Vietnam, we also had no clear plan there either. So my question was at the time to the Biden administration was, how do you plan to end this war? Like, where are we going to be like, okay, this is exactly what we want? And we never had that plan. And my same question to the Trump administration is, how do you plan to end this war? Really, how do you? And lastly, and I promise this is the last thing I have to talk about, it's the tariffs. So if you remember, a couple of months ago, President Trump threatened to implement those infamous reciprocal tariffs on the 2nd of April, which was 3 months ago. The tariffs were paused for 90 days, and well, that 90 days was supposed to run out this week. And I say supposed to because the tariffs have been delayed until August 1st. And the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent is warning that no progress is made by then with individual countries, tariffs will, quote, boomerang back to April 2nd levels. So if you remember, and I talked about this on the show, this is what caused the market to briefly tank and oil prices to reach their lowest in 4 years. And I don't have time to get into how this tariff plan never made any sense, but I will say that companies are already paying the 10% tariff on pretty much everything coming into the United States. I think every country has at least 10% tariffs. And the steel and aluminum tariffs are at 50%. And I think at China, those tariffs are at 45%. And some specific goods, I think electric vehicles are at either 100 or 200%. And when he was asked whether the administration is close to making any trade deals before Wednesday, Scott Bessent said, "I would expect to see several big announcements over the next couple of days." So maybe next week we will have some new trade deals. I kind of don't think we will, but who knows? I was expecting a very quiet July, but perhaps not. Anyway, we will find out in the coming weeks. So that is it for now. I hope you had a great holiday weekend if you're in the States, and we are now in the doldrums of summer. It's the hottest part of the year, so stay safe and stay cool. And please keep in your prayers the now over 70 people that have died in the floods in Texas. I don't know much about it, but that's what I know. So please keep them in your prayers. Have a good one. See you next week, and bye-bye.